Here we are. Everyone's already submitted their polls. We were all up late counting the ballots. That's not how it works, but I'll just pretend that's how it is. So yeah, we're just going to kind of go through all the films and have a little chat in between. I hope no one, there are no fights break out, but maybe I do. Any initial words? Anyone have any warnings, dietary notes, anything like that? No. Okay. Well, let's get into it then. Let's see. Number 10 of 2019. Yeah, we should have an applausometer. Just feel free. Definitely applaud for each one, or don't. Uncut Gems. I'm happy with that. What do we think?
Is there any dissent on here? I'd love to hear it. I mean, I guess I wrote about Uncut Gems for this in this new issue. There's a feature on it in the film, so I guess I can start, and then I'm interested to hear if anyone has any other thoughts. I have to admit it wasn't a film that I was as excited about as perhaps some other people. I admired Good Time, which was a film comic cover,
and also was
ago.
the number one of that year.
But I also had a weird thing that happened, and I can say this, I never actually wrote about it, that I fell asleep in the middle of it for about 5 minutes, and I missed a very important plot point.
Wait, Good Time or Uncut Gems?
In Good Time, which I've never written about, because I've seen it since, and now I understand the plot. But when I first saw it, I missed something very key, and so I was very lost. But there were things about Good Time that sort of rubbed me the wrong way. I thought Uncut Gems was... it rubbed me the wrong way in the right way. It was an incredibly difficult to watch movie. Yeah. I remember when I saw it, I was having a very frantic, harried day. Even getting to the theater, getting to the screening was really hard, and then the movie started really, really late, and then it was over late, so I had to get someplace after, and I was caught on a subway that stopped. It was kind of like being in the movie. Yeah. Basically, this kind of frantic, terrible, and those are really those bad subway musicians making it all the worse. But that's beside the point, obviously. I actually found this to be pretty terrifying, exhilarating film. Adam Sandler, of course, getting a lot of the talk, but it's really the experience of the film, the oral experience, the visual experience, the editing. I think the Safdie brothers they're the real deal.
Yeah.
I want to follow that up with a story of my own about watching Uncut Gems. How many people here have seen it? Oh, wow. Okay, quite a few. So this will make sense. So I saw it at the Toronto Film Festival, and I had a similarly harried experience because already it's a festival. It was my last day there. I hadn't eaten anything, and this whole time I just watching this movie and trying to parse all the dialogue, and it's so fast and it's so noisy, and then I had to leave. Before it ended, I had to miss the last 15 minutes to catch my flight.
No.
Exactly. So I ran out and, I had to get a cab and then I had to get to the airport. So then I come back to New York and I'm like, I saw most of it. I know where it was going. Exactly. And then I went to a press screening here and I saw the movie again. And I saw a totally different movie. I mean, I did not know what was coming, and I think that experience of watching it again and being doubly surprised and just taken aback and sort of encountering really how unpredictable and original this movie is in that way endeared it to me even more. And I was talking to someone today about, how do you choose how to put which movies on these lists, especially when you have just 10 spots. And I think one criterion that I've been trying to keep in mind is which movie genuinely feels completely original, which movie is something that every minute I did not know what was going to happen next or what particular elements these filmmakers were bringing into what combinations. And for me, Uncut Gems definitely is that film.
Yeah, it's just such a propulsive mode of filmmaking and just so immersive too. At any given point you just feel like you're in his headspace in every way, and it's not a great place to be, but it just feels completely authentic. And they really don't pull any punches. I know seems to be a fraction of the audience that has not seen it, but yeah. So that we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
I'm the dissenter.
Dissenter, okay, yes. We see the floor to the dissenter.
I like the Safdie brothers a lot. I've had, I think, 2 of their films on my top 10 or my top 20, but this did not make my top 50. So I'm a dissenter. In part, it was that I saw it under not the best circumstance. I saw it here in the New York Film Festival in Tully. And I saw it in a run of films which was The Irishman, Joker, and Uncut Gems. And when I got to Uncut Gems, I just thought, can movies do anything except pound you to death? And so I was set up badly for it. I also can't bear watching Adam Sandler. So. But the basketball player, actually, I'm on the New York Film Critics, and he got 2 nominations for Best Supporting Actor, which I thought was great.
Yeah, he's really, one of the
Really good.
Kevin Garnett, for those who don't know.
tensest scenes in the movie, the thing with the thing just crashing with the jewelry case.
Yeah, the thing I'll add about Kevin Garnett is that, because I actually had the chance to sit in on a round table with him and the Safdie brothers and Adam Sandler last week, I think, or maybe the week before. And one of the things he was talking about was how his basketball career had sort of unexpectedly prepared him for this movie, because he had a coach who would basically, like, in addition to just like regular basketball practice, like, you know, shooting free throws and like running laps or like doing whatever basketball players do, he would literally have them rehearse their faces as they're coming out of the huddle when he's called, you know, when he's like drawn up a player, called a player, whatever. And he's like, no, he was really serious about it. Like, he would make us do it over and over and over. And so, you know, by the time he's on a film set, like having to do takes, it's actually not that different from what he was doing in basketball practice.
Yeah, he literally had to have a game face.
Yeah.
Every single time. Alrighty, well let's go on to number 9. Laurie, yeah, give it up for Pedro Almodovar and Antonio Banderas. Like, without question, I don't know. While we're ranking, like, top 3 performances of the year, no question.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Michael, you actually wrote about this film as well.
I did. I mean, I even as an Almodovar aficionado, I thought this was a particularly wonderful movie. I think it's easy to call it, you know, perhaps his most personal film because it's so baldly autobiographical. But Banderas plays a surrogate Almodovar figure, basically. He even wears his clothes. His apartment is bedecked in things that are actually from Almodovar's apartment. But, you know, Almodovar's made a lot of personal films. You could say that all of his films are personal films. So what makes this one special, I think, is the way that it really, really gets at the, well, it's right in the title, right? The difficulty that comes with creating art, and that can be actual physical pain. If you've read interviews with Almodovar over the past few years, he does talk about these ailments that he has and how they are impediments to his creativity, even though he has so many ideas and so much that he wants to say. So for this film to dramatize that, to actually be able to get into the mind and the physicality of the artist that way, I found incredibly moving. And just generally, to see this kind of, if you want to say, general autobiographical genre, right, of the filmmaker, like the 8.5, all that jazz kind of film, to actually see that queered and done, you know, from the point of view of a gay male filmmaker, was kind of a revelation for me, to think that it hadn't really been done quite in this way before. I was intensely moved by this film, and I've seen it 3 times, and the 3rd time I saw it, I was nearly in tears through most of it, kind of just knowing what the scope of it is. It also has just one of the best last shots of any movie this year. Maybe the best. Oh, there are a few really great last shots. Maybe we'll talk about, but this is really extraordinary.
Yeah.
I really like this movie a lot, for a bunch of different reasons. One is, in general, I like the very early Almodovar, the really crazy ones, you know, the crazy trans ones. And then he got somewhat more respectable, and he started making more films about women, but more respectable, and he became a better filmmaker, but I thought a less interesting filmmaker. And what's so great about this film is it's looking back at those early crazy films without announcing them or showing them. But you know that is the period that when his, I don't want to give a lot of it away, but when his leading actor with whom he was in love comes back, those are the films that he was in. And I thought that was really amazing.
Yeah, there's a bit of a kind of a high wire aspect to that sort of stretch of the film, where you honestly don't know which. I mean, he made the film now, so he's around, but you almost don't know where he's going to be going and what will become of him and whether he will emerge from it. And there's such an intense tenderness and vulnerability to Banderas in this movie. You just kind of want to give him a hug half the time. It's really remarkable.
There's also this sequence where a former lover of his comes back, and the way that he re-enters the film is done through one of these kind of typical Almodovarian coincidences, but it's done in such a beautiful way that it just feels like fate, like it was meant to happen. And so much of this movie is about Banderas being Banderas' character being kind of buffeted along on these winds of change, and the plotting is just so lovely and subtle and lyrical. But there's this scene where this lover comes back and they share this moment together, and it's an erotically charged moment, though it's not an overtly sexual scene. But I can't think of anything I saw this year where I felt more chemistry between two actors than between Banderas and his name is Leonardo Sbaraglia, I believe, who also was in the new SAS film, Wasp Network. A wonderful actor, who I've loved in many things over the years. But the charge between these two men, these two middle-aged men who share this incredibly beautiful kiss, was very, very special as well. Great moment.
Yeah. And I think I always end up talking about colors at a certain point and sounding a little strange, but also just Almodovar, just always a filmmaker with an attention to the brightness and intensity. You can even just see in the still we have here something I always appreciate, because I don't know, oftentimes I don't always feel like that gets the same attention, or there's like a generic kind of like super saturation that goes on, but his attention to colors and composition is just still kind of unrivaled. All right, well, so that's Pain and Glory. How are we doing so far? Okay, good. On a scale of 1 to 10. All right, let's move on to film number 8, please. There we are.
Some Jia Zhangke fans.
Yeah, that's good. Is Purest White, directed by Jia Zhangke, and this is a good showing for him. I think he's always somewhere in our top 20 lists. I think that's, for me, the story of this movie is the lead performance, but I don't know.
Yeah, the performance is truly amazing, and she is threading her way through many of her past performances, just as the film is threading its way through the scenes, the settings, the milieu of many of his movies. And you can see that. And, it was made in a very interesting way. It was made with multiple, each act, let us say, has a different technology, so that it does move from film in the earliest film to a kind of crude digital video to better digital video. But it recapitulates all the locations of those earlier films, 5 of them, that were really collaborations between the actor and the director. And this is probably the strongest of that.
And I think when you interviewed him, I remember it came up that interesting comparison between the milieu of the criminal underground and that of independent cinema in China, and I thought that was a very interesting thing that drew out.
It is very interesting because the beginning setting is she is the kind of gangsters mall in this small town mafia, and her lover, who is a kind of big shot, then abandons her. She takes the rap for him, and he abandons her when she's in prison, and she goes out on her own and succeeds because she keeps the code of the gangsters. But what's so interesting about that comparison, about how you survive in China without joining the mainstream or the overground part of the economy, is that he is one of the most adroit maneuvers of power in the film world in China. I mean, this is a guy whose films are constantly banned, and yet he's able to start a film festival where he keeps total choice and power on his own.
Yeah, it's pretty
I
amazing.
mean, it's really amazing how he does this.
Yeah, I mean, I always consider that such a remarkable, package of skills to have the control as a filmmaker that he has, and also the canniness. That's often how you have the longevity that he has. And he's now at this point, he's kind of straddled almost like 2 to 3 to 4 different eras of filmmaking from late 90s, and then and each way finding a new way to kind of reinvent himself. But Michael, you're going to add something? Or?
Oh, I mean, I just wanted to just quickly say how much I love this movie. I mean, I've seen like there was like a general kind of ho-hum attitude on the panel about it, if you've seen it. But I actually, this was in my top 5 this year.
Oh, yeah.
This is probably my favorite Uncut film, and I've really loved quite a lot of them. I was sort of blown away by this. Structurally, I find it very interesting, as Amy was explaining. I find, Zhao Tao's performance to be sort of sublime. But there's this great, within these chapters, it's this great midsection, particularly once she gets out of prison, where she just starts to do all these kind of low-level shakedowns of these wealthy, disgusting men, that is just crowd-pleasing. Yeah. I mean, I saw it here at Alice Tully Hall at New York Film Festival, and people were almost on the floor. They were just, they were applauding. I mean, these cons are hysterical.
Yeah.
But it's also just the way that it plays the genre. It starts out like it's going to be this kinetic gangster film, and then it becomes something else, comes like a wandering film, and then it morphs into something else much more melancholy and strange at the end. Yeah.
And I mean, Xiao Tao shows her comedic skills here. I mean, there's one little bit of business that she does at like a buffet table that it's just, I don't know, it's like some sort of silent movie gag of like taking her hat off and putting it on again. It's just very funny. All right, well, that's number 8. Anyone want to guess what number 7 is? Not quite as exciting as guessing what number 1 is, but by then you might know. Okay, well, it's. I asked. It's my fault.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. There you go. Well played.
Should have saved that one.
You're off the hook for not saying Is Purest White. All right, let's see film number 7, please. High Life, Claire Denis, cover of our March-April issue, with a very moody Robert Pattinson in blue, and here, in yellow. But this is a twisted film.
I was actually kind of worried that people would forget about it because it was released earlier this year. Oh no! Well, I almost did, and then I caught up. I actually didn't see it during its theatrical run, and it was part of my end of year catch up, and I'm so glad I did. Sorry, Amy. It's very dark. So in some ways I want to forget about it too, because it really rattled me to the core. But it's also, it might be the most thought-provoking movie I've seen this year. It feels like a properly existential film, and it's the sort of thing I think very few directors, Claire Denis being one of them, can do, which is, this film is really an idea in cinematic form. It's not, it really is just, it's an idea imagined in all its existential and cerebral dimensions, but still incredibly affecting, and it still has to do with bodies and desire and bonds and intimacy, as Denise films always do. But it's that kind of film, and so it feels almost like a fragment. It's sort of incomplete, but it opens up all these horizons of possibility about life and existence in a really remarkable way. And I thought Robert Pattinson's performance was spectacular, and I'm kind of sad that people aren't talking about it anymore. Like, I think that is one performance people have forgotten, and I think, again, he is carrying he and Juliette Binoche also, and the other performers are saying everything with performance in this movie, because there's so much, there is such little exposition or commentary of any other kind. So it's all in how they're moving, and even we don't even properly understand how long, for instance, they've been on this ship, and it's all conveyed through just the growing wariness on their faces, how their attitudes towards each other change. So yeah, I think it's another Claire Denis movie that's going to be like one of the all-time greats for me, probably.
So you liked it?
Let me think about that.
Yeah. Sarai, you wanted to chime in about Pattinson, maybe?
I do. I feel like people. It's weird. He's still a sleeper. It's like he's still shaking off the hangover from being in those awful Twilight movies. And he really does. There really is more to him than that. And then you put him in something sort of like weird and experiential like this, and he really kind of like knocks you over with his abilities in a way that you might not necessarily like first realize about him.
Yeah, yeah. No, and this is a really tall order, because it's almost like being on a spaceship and setting something on a ship is like doing a piece of like black box theater or something. There's not a lot of room to maneuver, and so Devika, you were also just talking about like how you have to, you have to convey a lot with a little space, a little time, and this is a movie that just plumbs like depths of like what humans are capable of, and he has to kind of react and weirdly be a kind of moral center to the film, as much as that's possible, given the kind of degeneration that just occurs. I mean, it doesn't help that the camera loves him as well. But yeah, that's good. And Juliette Binoche, definitely, probably one of the best wigs of the year, I would say. I mean, it's kind of glorious. It's very, yeah. I think in an interview, Claire Denis was like just about how it was just perfectly like sort of witchy sort of a feel that it had. But we had them here for a talk, so I can plug a previous talk we did, which is a really entertaining talk with Claire Denis and Robert Pattinson about High Life. So what happens next? Well, I believe it's film number 6.
Hooray.
Hooray. The Souvenir, directed by Joanna Hogg. I adore this film. This is also quite a mood that we have here on this shot. This is kind of how most of us feel at any given time this past week. But yeah, I don't know where to begin. I was completely drawn in just by this kind of portrait of like innocence and experience, and just watching the main character, watching her just progress and kind of battle through. But of course, with Joanna Hogg's movies, this deep staging she does, just working things out in a space. I feel like basically she kind of reinvented or revived that deep staging, because when she does it, it just has an electricity again. I think there's maybe kind of lazier ways of using like this almost, I don't know, kind of tableau sort of format, and she's brought it to life. I mean, these scenes, and it's the scene when they are in the apartment, which becomes its own kind of dramatic space, are all just perfectly staged. So yeah, I can't say I was smiling from beginning to finish, but yeah.
Can we just take this opportunity to dunk on the Hollywood Foreign Press Association really quickly?
Please, yeah.
And and their seeming like willful ignorance that women make films at all.
Yes.
I just want to point that out. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Especially because this is the best movie of the year, according to me. Sorry. This was my number one. I know I was spoke too soon earlier when I said best last shot of the year, which that might be true of Pain and Glory, but this has the best last two shots of the year back to back. They're incredible. There's one thing that she does in this movie that I've never seen any filmmaker do, and it, just describing it won't mean much if you haven't seen the whole film, but the second to last shot of this movie is a double track. So the camera is tracking into the main character here, played by Honor Swinton-Byrne, who's a young filmmaker, at the same time that she is filming a shot of her movie on her own track. So her camera is moving left, and then the other camera's tracking in, and it's happening simultaneously. And there's such a power as she's slowly turning to the camera. There's such a power to it. And then the shot after it is this kind of recapitulation of Ford. It's like her Ford shot. This movie for me is just perfect. I mean, I've been a fan of Joanna Hoggs for a long time. She's also a great advocate for films. Mm-hmm. We all talk about Scorsese as a great advocate, but she started a film club where and she shows Ackerman films, and she brings awareness of many different types of filmmakers to people who may not have see them, and we should all be doing that right now. Advocacy is very important. And she's also just making these extraordinary works. And the Souvenir is this, I think Sheila wrote it in the piece, portrait of the artist as a young woman. And on top of that, it's this extremely harrowing depiction of addiction and being in love with somebody who is an addict. And I haven't seen it done quite so honestly. This movie really shakes me up, I have to say. And for it to be so still, so hauntingly still, makes it all the more painful. Yeah, yeah. And that the portrait of an addict, that he's very charming. I mean, he's a very kind of seductively, I don't know, acerbic figure. But also loathsome. Like it's. And loathsome. I heard a lot of people criticize the film, or at least talk about how they couldn't take watching the film because he's so clearly. Wrong for her, or using her, which he is, or loathsome in some way, or he lords over her with his opinions. But that's this is based on her experience. This is something that she went through. This is sort of like a tribute to someone who was who holds a very painful place in her life, in her past. And it just felt very honest to me, because you can't really solve all the problems. You can't choose who you fall in love with sometimes, and you can't make all of the pain go away instantly. So for her to kind of plumb these depths, I thought was very brave, actually. Yeah. I think it's also interesting as another, I guess in the past couple of years, you've had movies that are really intense, like memory pieces, and that's an aspect of this film as well, where Joanna Hogg is kind of recreating a lot of, things from her past, down to using 8mm that she shot 60mm that she shot herself, rather Super 8. Anyway, we'll fix that in post. And in her apartment, I believe the view outside her window, uses slides that she took of the view outside her window when she was growing up, and all sorts of other aspects from it. There's text that's read in the movie that is from letters that she herself got from the corresponding difficult relationship that she had. But I just like this as well because, let's say another memory movie like Roma was one that, totally different, no comparison, but, this is one that kind of grabbed me more somehow because it didn't feel like vanishingly meticulous in its approach somehow, but I don't know. That's just, and then this year as well, you have other movies like The Irishman as well, which is also very meticulous about recreating the past and really thinking about the filter we see it through.
But I don't know. That was one thing. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I guess, is another memory film in a way. But yeah, that's my little sidebar on memory. All right, well, let's move on to the next film on the list. Number 5. Number 5 is Atlantics, directed by Mati Diop. I should probably also say, most of these films were in the New York Film Festival. This is as well, and it's in Cannes as well. But Atlantics, who wants to speak to Atlantics?
I'll go. All right. Yeah, I really love this film. This is probably like one of my top 3 this year, actually, now that I think about it. Because, I just think Madi is so interesting in the way that she tells this story that's a ghost story, right? But it's also about, the idealism of young love, and how capitalism crushes that. Yeah. And she's folding in all of these different social influences on her heroine's life, on Ada's life. But the thing that still every time I think about this film that blows my mind is that the actress who plays Ada doesn't speak French. And Madi does not speak Wolof, and somehow the two of them manage to communicate. And when I asked her about this, she basically said that she was using a lot of her own instincts and experiences with acting, and she was very particular about her blocking and just sort of the atmosphere of the set in terms of what she was going for, and I think you can really see that in the film. Yeah. The ending just crushes me every time. I've seen this 3 times now, and I still just yeah. I wish I could be more articulate, but yeah.
No, this film is also in my top 3, and I have the same problem of being absolutely unable to find words to talk about how the impact this film had on me. And I have to say, you used the phrase vanishingly meticulous earlier, and I liked that phrase because this is not a film that looks perfect, and it's not like a perfect object. And which is not to say that it's bad or it's poorly made. It's just not aspiring for that sort of glossy, technical, and formal seamlessness. But it's also probably the most cinematic experience I had in a movie theater this year, because, in the way that its emotions are so big, even though it's not actually a big movie, yeah, but the emotions are so big, and the way in which it just washes over you, and the themes of romance and lovesickness and grief, all these very cinematic themes, and the kind of what we really think of cinema as representing loss and spectrality, all of that is just so beautifully represented in this film. While also, Mati is able to do that while also being really particular about the socio-political details of this story. And definitely one of the best films I've seen about migration in recent times, which is a popular topic now, but again, this sort of the ability to bring out its affective dimensions, to be able to tell the story of economic oppression, about economic refugees, oppression, and neoliberalism through the story of adolescent and teenage desire it's quite exceptional. And she's not a new filmmaker. She's been making very acclaimed shorts for a while. She's been an actress, but it's still kind of very impressive that this is her first feature film. And the fact that it's up here, it's totally deserved, and also something that we should take note of.
Yeah, I think
how many people have seen Atlantics?
Okay. Oh, goody. I was about to say, if my uncle made Tuki Buki, I think I would just sort of roll over and give up.
And then her film, A Thousand Suns,
Oh yeah.
is, I mean, to be able to take on the legacy of, her uncle, who's Jibril Diop Mambedi, and then to create another work of art that's not derivative or trying to challenge that legacy in any way. I mean, it's just so organic and emotionally honest, and that's the thing about this film too. It's so emotionally honest, and that courses through all of her work, even though she's so attentive to form and experimentation. So yeah, that's good genes.
Yes.
Good.
The
That's
one
a good lineage.
thing I want to add is just like this shot. The shot that I always like come back to when I think about this film is, there's this shot where Ada is meeting her betrothed, who's this like much wealthier man at this hotel, as she's basically still like worrying over the boy who's gone off and left because his boss hasn't paid him in like 4 months. And it's this shot where the fiance is like swimming in this infinity pool that's part of the property of the hotel, and then like outward you see like this vast ocean and the horizon, and there's just like so much in that shot of, like basically of Suleiman, her boyfriend, being left to the whims of this like giant, seemingly endless body of water, and then you have this man who, by the fact that he has money and he has an education and, he comes from France and he's here to pick up a wife and, go back to doing whatever he does, that wealth affords him the control of this infinity pool and the safety of this infinity pool, as opposed to just being, left to the mercies of Mother Nature.
It's such striking contrast to the complete like powerlessness and just adversity of the what opens the films, which is the migrant workers who are being stiffed with their wages, and yeah, I mean, we haven't touched upon as much the kind of supernatural element to the film as well, which is something that is just incredibly phased into such that you just believe it as a reality, and it's like I don't even question it,
I mean, what I find really strong in the film, everyone else in the film is constantly saying Ada, and everyone is projecting their own belief about who this young coming of this girl in the liminal zone becoming an adult, and she's not able to articulate this because everyone else is so busy projecting on her their religious beliefs, their romantic beliefs, their beliefs about money and power, and finally by the end she looks at herself in the mirror and she says, I am Ada. And for me, that was one of the most moving moments in a film all this year. I also think, all films are imperfect. This is one of the most ravishingly beautiful films I've ever seen. And the sound is the most ravishing soundtrack, certainly, of any soundtrack this year. So it is, unlike High Life, which I can't support at all, because, because Matty Diop learned something from Claire Denis, and what she learned from Claire Denis is this tactile relationship, not only visual relationship, to place, and the richness of the world as it is out there, whether it's interiors or exteriors. And I thought Claire threw that all away in High Life, just making this constructed set and not having anything after the first scene with Pattinson and the baby, which is a very tactile scene, not having anything that is her real talent to make this film with. So So Maddie Diop took it over from me.
Pass the baton, yeah.
And one more thing about this is that we should give some credit to Claire Mathon, who is the cinematographer of this film, who also is the cinematographer of Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And just in case that doesn't come up, and it might not happen in the next 4 movies, which would be a crime. But in case that doesn't come up, we have to give some credit to her, because her photography in those 2 films is probably the story of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just in this film, just in a variety of moods and tones, and just like strange effects. I mean, the club by the water, by the sea that they keep going to. There's this little thing that happens with the play of lights, of like, there's some sort of light show thing that they have in the club where you just watch it and I just sort of phase in and out of like awareness. It's this beautiful, like an interior constellation of some sort. The recurring refrain of these shots of the sun, and this even, I mean, clearly Claire Mathon also works well with composite images, because there's this thing of just this grotesque glass Hulk skyscraper that the workers are working on, as workers do. And it's actually, I guess, a composite image and it's entirely convincing.
Yeah.
And
it's entirely convincing, but because the air around it is so saturated with plaster dust, it looks like a Fata Morgana.
Yes.
Just rising.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sets the tone for maybe this is some kind of magical realism, because the thing that the political part of the story is grounded in is also not real in a sense.
Very intriguing, that part. Wait, can you explain that? The political part of that.
Well, the story begins with the gap between the very rich and the very poor, and the workers have to migrate because they're not getting paid.
Right, okay.
And that part of the story, the building, which also in the narrative is foreign money.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's,
right, that's true. Yeah. That's interesting.
It's from one of the oil countries.
Right.
So all of that is in this thing, but it doesn't look real either. It looks like an illusion.
Yeah. No, that's
that
great.
was the sense watching it. I thought, this is a mirage? Am I actually here?
Yeah. One other person just to mention as well, since we were talking about sound and the score, Fatima Al-Qadiri, who did the score for this, which is an interesting hybrid of kind of traditional and electronic music. We have an interview with her, I guess in our last issue, or maybe it's the present one, anyway. So just another person to pay attention to. All right, well, let's see what film number 4 is.
I am so heartened by this reaction, because this is the objective number 1 film of the year, folks. You can go home after this. This is it.
Yes, Transit, Christian Petzold, a movie that, I mean, I feel kind of silly. I thought it was a movie that people would somehow forget about. It kind of came out earlier in the year, but apparently not. But Devika, would you like to say a few words about Transit?
Yeah, I mean, again, a movie that just reduces me to, an inarticulate mess. Again, this is a movie where, I completely stand behind my number 1, but it's also the one that I just, voted with my heart, so to speak. This is a movie of the year that affected me most deeply and opened up like these depths of feeling that I'm still like trying to grasp. I would say I saw this is going to sound totally blasphemous, but the first time I saw this was on a plane, because it like came out in Germany last year, and I was on like a transatlantic flight. And I know that's not ideal, but it was somehow ideal, because I was in transit, and they say you cry more when you're on planes or something. Anyway, I sobbed the whole time. I think, actually, it's interesting that we're talking about it immediately after Atlantics, because I think this is, again, a film that is able to create the most beautiful romanticist saga out of the horrible reality present and past of migration, and still have it be sort of extremely cutting in its critique. And this is an adaptation of Anna Seeger's novel of the same name, and Petzold brings to it, a couple things of his own, and one of them is his affinity for ghost stories. Again, so interesting that we're talking about it right after Atlantics, but and this is sort of the third in a trilogy that I think he has called Love in the Times of Oppressive Systems. Just so perfect. And it's a ghost story in many, many ways, and one of them is that it seems to kind of eerily evoke his last two films of the decade, Barbara and Phoenix. There's like these recurring tropes and images and the ways in which the narrative works is somehow mirrored in this film. And so he really is able to bring out that the supernatural of the story, even though it's not a supernatural story, but the workings of chance, I should say, not the supernatural, but the way in which the workings of chance intersect with the cold logics of power in history and in the present. And his sort of the twist that he brings to the novel is that he sets the story in like an unspecified present that looks like modern day France. So the mise en scène is completely modern, but the story is referencing the World War II era France. And so this mixing of times produces this absolutely unsettling effect, and is and the fact that it's not really signaled in any way, so it takes a while for you to even understand that you're being deceived. And that period of you trying to figure out like what's happening, when is this, why do their suits look so modern, but their visas are like piece of parchment. That process of figuring it out is just so rich with all kinds of commentary and possibility. And the way in which it like comes towards the end to the theme of love, which is this, that's why he called it Love in the Times of Oppressive Systems. I mean, just bringing together the theme of love and desire with the theme of like being stuck in bureaucratic limbo. I think that is a masterstroke because, and I just wrote about this film for our issue, so, and this is what I said, so I'm just kind of going to quote myself so that
exclusive preview.
If you read it, you don't think I'm just plagiarizing myself. But in this sort of the state of being in limbo, of being stateless, is maddeningly opaque, and it's laden with this crazed anticipation. And love can feel like the most alluring, the most powerful of signs when you have nowhere else to go. Being in love can feel like a home when you don't have a home. And I think that is what this film realizes with just stunning precision and stunning emotion. So before I start crying again, someone else please talk about this film.
Mic drop.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to follow that, or if I should. I think it's just perfect. So, well, let's see what number 3 is. It's applause. I heard the ritualistic thumping of our cushions. Is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by this up-and-coming director you might have heard of, Quentin Tarantino. He's sort of a shy, retiring filmmaker. But this is. One interesting way just to step back for a second is, this is a movie that is kind of much wider in release and reach than many of the other movies we've talked about, which is kind of interesting. I like that, And I've been kind of really heartened by the fact that it's captured the imaginations of a lot of critics as well, because it's a funny, for me, it's like a funny hybrid of like a really involved personal experiment, but also just like a nice piece of pop art in a way, and also just a hangout film. I think I don't know if I read somewhere, but like Richard Linklater said something about, I believe, if I remember correct, that this is kind of Tarantino's hangout film, like in a way, and he should know. But yeah, I really kind of luxuriated and enjoyed just the friendship, the buddiness. They're super friends. I don't know. What's not to like? Well, I know people might have something to say.
I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites because of shirtless Brad Pitt, but I wouldn't not say it's one of my favorites because of shirtless Brad Pitt. He's well preserved.
It's true. It's true. He's, I mean, and then like the camera lingers on him as a, working on some roofing work. It's a memorable scene in the movie.
I was gonna say, does this thing stop working? By the way, I don't know.
Do we? We didn't mean to turn it
Everyone
off.
can hear me. It's fine. It's fine. Small room anyway. This movie made me realize the importance of working through something once you've seen it. For me, working through it through writing. I mean, it's what I didn't know. I generally am a fan. I believe of Quentin Tarantino. It's hard to know. It's hard to know sometimes. I came of age at a time when he was so central and so important, and so many things that I saw were so exhilarating that he made. And then you go through phases of questioning why you feel a certain way about something. I knew there was something wrong with it.
You were saying you love Tarantino unambiguously.
Yes. That's it. No, but I've gone through my ups and downs with a lot of filmmakers. Tarantino is a great example of that kind of filmmaker because he's not just divisive in the culture. Right? He opens up different valves in me depending on what I'm watching, and I think as I've gotten older and watched more films, I also question more what violence means on screen, and I'm less willing to just kind of accept any representation of violence, certainly certain kinds. So this was an interesting one to think about and wrestle with because it's so sharply divided in what it's doing, right? You have basically 2 hours and change of a fairly good-natured, like you called it a hangout movie, but I mean it really, you kind of burrowing in on these lives of these people. It's really set to the rhythm of a city. I mean, I love the scenes that are just watching Brad Pitt drive around Los Angeles. It's just, I mean, there's nothing more purely pleasurable. When it gets to the point of what it's all doing in the last half hour, I was repulsed. And then I had to kind of think about why I was repulsed. Is it helpful that I'm being repulsed? Am I supposed to be as repulsed as I am? The movie opened up a lot of conversations about, because of the Margot Robbie character playing Sharon Tate, conversations about, the amount of dialogue she had and if she was given a full character to play. I think she brings a lot to it. I think it's a beautiful performance. But those questions are valid. But being followed up by such extreme violence, much of it happened upon women. I know that the circumstances of the plot make you think that it's correcting this history and that it's supposed to be this like satisfying revenge plot of the people who were, I'm just going to spoil at this point, the people who carried out the Manson killings.
Right? It's been like 6 months.
So there's just something, it was almost like Minority Report for me. I couldn't quite get my head around the fact that yes, but they didn't do that. Just because we're aware that it happened, in the world of the film, they did not do those murders. So the incredibly graphic, outsized violence that is meted out upon these women is, is that, I don't want trying to use for a word other than appropriate, because that's not what this movie's about, but it felt very outsized and very gleeful. And it kind of ruined the rest of the movie for me as I was watching it. That said, when I went back, saw it again, and wrote about it and thought about it, I realized that I could regain a lot of the pleasures that I had from the film. I think it's in many ways a beautiful film, but I do think that Tarantino, the way that he represents violence sometimes doesn't feel completely earned, perhaps. Or at least it's still a conversation to be having. I was not. It's the same thing? I don't think it's the same thing. I don't think it's the same as burning Hitler alive. I don't know, in a movie theater. I don't know. Well, we can talk about that, but I want to hear what other people have to say about it.
I think he pulls his punches all the time, and that doesn't mean that the film isn't violent. The violence is the way he pulls his punches. I I like the scenes with Brad Pitt, not just driving around. I like Brad Pitt at the Spahn Ranch. Tarantino really knows how to build the anticipation of something bad going to happen. And besides, it's a pretty good representation of that piece of history. And I love that Charlie, although I think Mary Harron's Charlie Says is a much better movie about the whole Manson thing, and a much sharper, smarter movie. But what I really wasn't interested in was the hanging out part. You know, I don't know why I'm doing it, and I don't have a thing for Leo at all. I never have since he got older than 12, and when he was very beautiful as a 12-year-old. And on top of that, I'm sorry, I have a terrible cold, so that's why I sound this way. But, you know, someone came up to me and said, I think it's terrible that people are being deprived of what really happened then when they see this movie. And they don't even know they're being deprived of that. That this isn't that story of how the Manson murders happened and what happened for decades as a result of that. So that was one problem I have. The other problem I have is the 60s was so much more interesting, and there was so much more interesting film and art and television than Tarantino's version of being obsessed, you know, with the worst kind of Western television series that were perfectly awful. And he's absolutely determined that we all appreciate that stuff the way he did.
Yeah.
That's what I have to say.
Yeah, it is kind of like he wants us to relive sitting next to him as a kid watching, you know, TV shows or something to a certain extent.
The only thing I will say about this movie is I fell asleep while watching it, and not because I was tired.
This panel's not really reflecting well on critics' habits. It's like, we're falling asleep, we're running to screenings, we're watching things on planes. It's just, it's like, I never saw this movie. I guess I should admit that. I'm just kind of extrapolating. No, I've seen it.
To say one more thing, again, like, I like this film generally, I believe. I went to see it. I was driven to see it again within the same week. Like, I turned around and I watched it again because I wanted to go through that experience and see how I felt about it. And it's I mean, the craft on display is undeniable.
Yeah, that's something that is wonderful about it. Just on every level, you could give credit, like production design, costume design, and all of it.
Yeah, I do find that
But
he's,
not editing.
I think you, like what you
I
articulated.
mean, you know, 40 minutes could have come out of this movie so easily.
Yes.
Counterpoint.
Oh, I was just gonna say that, like, I think this is, oh God, there's so much about this guy that just makes me just roll my eyes. And yet, like, somehow, like, I will come back to his films later, like 10 years later, and be like, God damn it. And I think, like, I think what you're articulating about this one is yeah. I think that's just sort of like, that's just part of his oeuvre.
Well, there's even like The Hateful Eight is something that I truly loathed. I think it wants you to loathe it, and I think he achieved that.
Yeah.
And I do not want to watch that movie ever again. But
That's
when
how I feel about Django.
And second worst, with some great scenes, you know. So,
Right.
but there's always something that's interesting, either structurally or within perfectly crafted sequences. Like Amy was saying, this he builds suspense better than anybody working now. So even when I hate something like The Hateful Eight, I still think, oh, but you know, there's like the kernel of something interesting there that could have been.
Yeah.
It's too often it gets kind of, you know, lumped up together with the stuff that drives me insane.
Yeah.
But that's what makes interesting filmmaking.
Yes, indeed. You can have a dialogue. Just to mention, since I'm doing little plugs here, we actually had Mary Harron, director of Charlie Says, who had a totally different and very, very interesting film about Manson, and actually about Mansonites, I should say, for a talk here, and you can find that online. She was amazing and talks about her post-punk history. But we have another couple of films coming up, and we're sort of running out of time. And I guess we can unveil the next one. All right, number 2, please.
There we go.
All right, The Irishman, Martin Scorsese. We had some tepid clapping, I think. Perhaps people were expecting a higher ranking.
Some people wanted it at number 1.
Yes, I think that's probably what it was. Number 2 is pretty good. Take it away, Michael.
I'd like to. Well, I actually. Am I allowed to just like pass out? Because Amy, we had at one point been talking about it. At one point, we were recording a different podcast talking about something else, and you had seen it, but you had some reservations, and you were wondering. And then you said you saw it a second time, and you sent me this email where you said, "Oh my God." So I want to hear about your experience the second time watching it.
Okay, so I've seen The Irishman 3 times, and I'll probably see it more times, partly because of the craft, because I think it's the most brilliantly edited film, I've pretty much ever seen. And the first time I saw it, I thought, all this craft, and it's wasted on these people who are so not even loathsome. I mean, they barely register as human beings. They are so programmed, like all of us are, by this society in which they are functioning like cogs in this machine. And I somehow couldn't accept that. That Scorsese was wasting his time yet again with this milieu. And what happened was, the second time I watched it, right from the beginning I was more interested, but I watched it clear to the end. And in the credits, after the last song, In the Still of the Night from the nursing home, bleeds over into the beginning of the credits. And then it switches to this incredible Robbie Robertson, largely almost no vocal, but for this keening accordion, bass, and piano, I think. But it's a totally different kind of music, and suddenly it reminds you how closed this world of this film is, and that there is another world outside it, but that it's all the same. Because, this is a very religious film. This is Scorsese at his most Catholic. It's kind of like T.S. Eliot, the beginning of Burnt Norton. Time present and time past are all contained within time future, and time future within time past. And therefore, we as humans can't speak of or understand eternity, but that is where we all are. I mean, this is really, really about Catholic redemption, and I was very moved by it. And I went back and watched the film again, and I was very moved by the whole thing. I also think there's very smart stuff in it, like the fact that the De Niro character learns to kill when he's in World War II, and they discover in him that he has a talent for doing things that are against the law. and they can go to him and say, murder the German soldiers instead of us having to lug them as prisoners. And he's responsive to that, and he gets out, and then he becomes a soldier in a different kind of army. And I found that all really, really, really moving. And also, the milieu seems to be like the milieu in Washington right now. I mean, that was stunning. How they, it's the mafia running the White House. And there's no gap at all. So I thought all of those things were going on. Plus, it's gorgeous. I mean, it looks like Rembrandt's.
Yeah. Well, that's always fascinating when your view of a movie can evolve. This is a movie where I've seen it twice. The second time standing up. The whole thing, yeah. Well, see, I went to like the last screening of the festival here, and it was all full, and I was just sort of waiting for people to sit down and to sneak a seat. And that didn't happen. So I just stood, and then I don't know why I'm saying this, but then I convinced myself it was like having a standing desk. I just had me watching a movie. Anyway, now that you think I'm insane, I saw it a second time, and I think it's a movie where I wanted my feelings to like evolve on it, but I just felt I kind of retrenched. And the thing that just came back to me again and again is the way it's dealing with death and just the feeling. I know that it's supposed to seem routine in the movie, and that it's his job. It's what he does, is get rid of people. It's kind of miraculous how he stages a lot of the murders in this movie. They're like really fast, it's just sort of.
You blink, you don't see a lot of them.
Yeah. Just walk by, not even drive by, just walk by. And at a certain point, I began to wonder what deaths mean, and this is a bit speaking to like why revisit the mafia milieu, mafia genre. I guess I came to a point where I had death saturation in the sense of thinking about what deaths mean in a movie. In a mafia movie, they show you the stakes. They show you how far a person will go, and it just started to feel to me like a shorthand that I felt kind of lost. I don't know, the value of the life or the value of the death. And somehow in this movie it did, even though at the same time it's a movie that makes you feel, dying and the passage of life and the fullness of it through the emptiness as well.
Well, I mean, that's what's so extraordinary about it. I mean, what you're saying, it's people emptied out of their souls. People emptied out of anything resembling what we're used to watching from movie characters, right? And even from Scorsese films. I mean, Goodfellas is about this to a certain extent. Casino is about these people who are stuck in these patterns and routines and never grow and never learn and just keep doing the same terrible things over and over again. But they're usually a little kinetic and exciting and fascinating. I mean, De Niro in this movie is completely bleached of anything resembling human interest. And I find that incredibly compelling. I mean, that last half hour, especially when you don't even know what does redemption even mean to him at that point? And then what does it mean to us as viewers? And I thought it was kind of like this brilliant kind of corrective to a lot of gangster films.
Yeah. No, I mean, there was a dimension to it where, like the American history dimension, I thought it was kind of funny watching Scorsese kind of tell history through this as well. I mean, there are obviously like 100 things going on in this movie. So that was like a history of labor in the United States is kind of interesting from that perspective. And the idea of De Niro's character is, I mean, admittedly he's a hitman, but he's also like a working man in a way, and this is kind of the working man's life and death. So it was interesting, but I don't know. Maybe because I had just finished watching Mindhunter, I kind of like, it was kind of grueling, or maybe because I was standing. I don't know. Any other thoughts on the Irishman? All right. Well, it's the final moment. I'm sure there are bettors among you who might guess, but can we see the number one film of 2019? Parasite, Bong Joon-ho.
How everybody's happy.
We're happy with this?
Yeah.
I think so. It sounds so.
I mean, Amy and I did a whole podcast, but I feel like
That's
I
true.
want to hear
You're off the
someone
hook.
else.
I will say, I think it's an amazing movie. I think I kind of enjoyed it less than other people, not necessarily
Party
because of the
pooper.
movie, but because I copy edited Amy's feature about the movie.
Oh my God, and it made you enjoy it less?
Well, no. Your feature was excellent, but I already knew so many
You know all
details.
the twists.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry, this I didn't mean this as a criticism of your piece. It's a wonderful piece that you should read. It's in the September-October issue.
And it clearly has a warning at the beginning, like, don't dare read this if you haven't seen the movie, because Bong was he was vehement about that. And he was vehement about a certain aspect of the film, or a certain moment in the film, which is the great moment in the film. But you can't say that because you can't give that away.
Well, I had no choice, unfortunately.
She was just doing her job.
I already knew a little too much about the mechanics of the movie, and so much of the pleasure of the movie is seeing how it sort of teeters from one thing to the next and back and takes some wild turns. So I almost feel like I'm robbed of my ability to judge it really in
You're hurting, Amy.
hey, but your essay was excellent. So it's not all all was not lost. But I will say, I love Bong Joon-ho. I love his previous work. I actually am obsessed with Okja, which many people seem to think is not that good, and I think
Okja is
it's perfect.
great.
Really?
We love Okja.
I think it's a perfect movie. And so again, with the disclaimer that I was kind of tainted as a viewer coming to Parasite, I will say that I do have some other reservations about it too. I think it totally deserves its place in the top 20, but it wouldn't have been my number one. I don't think I put it in my top 5 just because I think there's something a little clinical about it. Its construction to me is so perfect that it alienated me a little bit. It didn't have the kind of like a genuine strangeness which I loved in Okja, like a genuine like ridiculous strangeness.
You just wanted Jake Gyllenhaal to show up and start doing some crazy voice.
Maybe. Song Kang-ho is pretty great. No complaints about the actors. I think is actually, for me, the best part of the film. The performances are impeccable. The best ensemble performance of the year for sure. But yeah, I just felt a little bit removed from it. And I do think that its class critique is not quite as strong and as complex as people have made it out to be. I'm not saying it has to be strong or complex for the movie to be good, but it does, the way the movie has been talked about sets up certain expectations for your reaction, and so then it fell short of those reactions for me. So, but if Bong Joon-ho is winning, I'm happy. That's all.
I think there's, like, my thoughts about this movie are actually about Bong's films generally. He has something, I feel like he has an approach in common with a playwright who has, like, the most controversial play on Broadway right now, which is Slave Play. And Jeremy O'Harris has the thing that he likes to say about his work, which is that his goal is to dom the audience.
You bet.
And I feel like that's what Bong does with his films. So that's what I'll say.
That's really interesting.
I walked out of Slave Play and watched it from the back because I don't like being domed as an audience. And the actors, I don't know when you saw it, but now the actors are really just mugging and playing to the audience and camping it up, and it's really awful.
Yeah, they are.
It
I will say
really
they're
is
definitely
awful.
doing that in a way that they weren't when it was at New York Theater Workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Parasite.
Parasite. So I kind of disagree with this about Bong, who, I mean, for me, the reason he is a great filmmaker and that I love his films in the way I can't love The Irishman is that his characters and the scenes in his film, there are so many colors And something can move so easily to comedy and then to being just heart-wrenching in almost every single scene. And yes, that's partly because he chooses his actors very well and they play it, but it's also the way he stages the scenes and writes the dialogue to the degree that we can understand what they're saying in subtitles, which we don't really.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a almost elastic quality to the anticness of some of his scenarios. Where, yeah, you don't necessarily know where it's going. You don't know where you're going as you're moving through it. And then in a way, yeah, it's very, just sort of unbearably poignant sometimes, and then sometimes uproarious. And another great ending. we have quite a collection of endings here.
I was just going to say this has nothing to. This is not a response to Devika at all. This is because I was generally thinking about this in relation to this movie. When something reaches some sort of like saturation point in the culture, there tends to be I'm not going to call it the B word, but meaning backlash. But there tends to be like, what? I realize I should define what
there were many options there.
Backlash. But there does tend to be, kind of devaluing perhaps of something that is just clearly great, such as Parasite. And I'm not even saying it was my number one movie of the year, as I've said before. It was not. It was definitely on my list, but I was exhilarated by it, and I love a beautiful mess as much as anyone else, but I also love, I do love something that is so perfectly conceived and executed like this movie was. Those hairpin turns that Amy's talking about were, when I first saw this film, it was not optimal. I actually watched it on a screener at home, and then I did end up seeing it in the theater, which was a much better experience. But even from home, this was absolutely thrilling because I was so keyed into every single moment, every single plot turn, every single performance, every single gesture. When you're really in the hands of a master like that, you can. I wouldn't say you can just sit back and relax because he doesn't let you do that. But you can be confident that you're going to be taken someplace special. And yes, it's we can all say like something doesn't go as deep politically as it could or should or whatnot. But I mean, this is a really good pop, like a pop evocation of a particular political reality that's felt by most people around the world. And I think that's why it's registering. I think people are really responding to what this movie is saying, and they can be entertained.
Yeah. No, I always think that's a special kind of movie magic, when you can have a movie that's so popular and profound at the same time and so absolutely skillful. Well,
so what's next?
And his favorite director is Hitchcock. So
what's that?
One of his favorite directors is Hitchcock. I mean, the popularity and
the same
art
blend.
of Hitchcock.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that is the end of our list, but it's not the end of movies. We'll have more. I just want to clarify that in case you thought we were just going to burn the rest of the movies. But definitely we'll see you in the new year with a new issue. We'll have another talk in the new year. We'll have a reader's poll so you can share with us what your top 10s and top 20s are, so please do that. But thank you to our wonderful panel, and thank you to our wonderful audience.
Thank you.